Good morning. Lovely. I know we're in the danger zone. Keep it before you guys go to lunch, but I want to say thank you all for coming to joining us in this session today. And I think we have a treat. We're gonna go slow. We're gonna go fast. There'll be different kind of voices we're gonna hear in this segment, all centered around this idea of what do safeguards look like in action. And I think what's been interesting at coming to IDF Africa a few years now is seeing the evolution of the discussion from okay, here are the strategies that we have around ID, here's the technology that we're doing about ID, but more increasingly, actually, there's this trust thing that we need to solve for because we can't get enrollment if people don't feel confident in the system, if we don't engage different stakeholders and represent their interests in understanding how we think about those strategies, and ultimately, how do we bring more stakeholders into the conversation as we kind of navigate those issues? And so, for today's discussion, if my clicker, there we go. So today's discussion, we're going to be very much centered into this idea of around those safeguards, because increasingly in the conversations that we've been having with different governments, different stakeholders, they've increasingly said, okay, I'm willing to buy the idea that I need to speak to some more actors, to think about trust, to bring community into the process. But what does that look like? How do I do that? You're asking me to do something that I think is going to introduce risk, bring in different actors, sometimes civil society, who have been very critical of some things in the past. How do we do that? And how do we do it in a way that allows us to still move quickly, to be effective to the different actors that we're working with, and ultimately to create value for all of the actors in the ecosystem? So, we're going to kick off kind of hearing a little context, but then looking specifically at Africa and what are the aspects of governance that are relevant to this topic of safeguards. Then we're going to go and talk about a couple initiatives, the UN Universal DPI Safeguards Initiative that was endorsed by 190 member states last year, and it's saying at a global level, actually, this is something that's really important for us to think about and do as a community, and which there are between 15 to 20 countries that are now implementing that framework. And then we're going to get into the weeds. We're going to hear from Malawi. We're going to hear from South Africa. We're going to hear from Nigeria in terms of how they're thinking about partnership for their work, for their ID rollouts. And then once we've heard from some of our partners implementing and leading ID implementation, we're going to go to some of our societal actors, civil society, different persons leading those projects, but also hear from some of the technology providers who are also thinking about safeguards, the infrastructure level. So we're going to touch different parts of the elephant. And again, I think throughout this process, we're going to have questions. We'll be using Slido, but I think we're going to have a good time together before lunch. And let's kick us off. Let's get started. So, to begin, I'm going to invite up Christina Rao, who is a research fellow at the University College of London and a consultant with Co-Develop. And she's going to talk about the DPI mapping and how do we measure public value within the context of these projects. So, welcome Christina up for me, please.
Hello, everyone. But I'm also consultant at Co-Develop, working specifically on inclusion and safe. But I'm also consultant at Co-Develop, working specifically on inclusion and safeguards. So I get to be that bridge between what research is saying and what practically can happen in policy and practice. And hopefully, I do a good job with that. So, show of hands, how many in this room think they know what a digital identity system is? A digital identity system, better ID for Africa. How many understand digital ID? 10, 10, 15? That's it? Okay. How many are comfortable with the concept of digital public infrastructure? I had some conversations where suddenly annoyed that digital ID is DPI, totally fair. But how many understand? Okay, more understand DPI than digital ID. Okay. Um, okay, so my research focuses on unpacking these concepts, and I'm going to show you what came up when we tried to do the unpacking. Um, Clicking. So we're sensing this shift from digital ID to suddenly calling digital ID digital public infrastructure. And some of us put our heads together to figure out what is this shift and what does it look like in practice. Um, Visually, the shift looks like something like this, which is a move from a siloed system. Could we move to the next slide, please? A siloed system where each department in a government is their own users to interact with those layers of the text. Um, we try to look at all systems. Here's a representation of both payment systems and identity systems. There's also a data exchange system, and as we know, DPI refers to these three components. We're focusing this discussion on ID systems, so let me zero in on that. What we found is if we laid out these digital systems side by side and looked at what common features exist across them, we found that they speak to elements of technology as well as safeguards, as well as capacity of the government. It looks different. The adoption value and societal value. And societal value is what I'm going to stay with through this presentation. This is the hook. We spent 1 year researching digital systems across the globe. This is what we found. There's no 1, 2, or 5 or 10 DPI systems. There's as many as 57 countries across the globe that have digital ID like digital public infrastructure, 93 for payments, and 103 for data exchange. When we say ID systems are DPI like, we mean that not only are they called digital ID systems that are DPI, but they facilitate digital authentication. They're used by more than one department, not only the tax administration, a driver's license department, or something else, but more than one, ideally. And they're active and in operation. And the way we studied it was a normative exercise, and you'll see a beautiful visual chart that took us a while to build out. It's about 6 features across technology, governance, from digital systems to DPI systems, but it has a lot of infrastructure benefits for how they plan service delivery, how they plan citizen-centric services, and to measure the value of this shift, they're falling short of tools, measurement tools, research tools. So, a snapshot of Africa and ID systems in Africa. This is a map, by the way. You can go to dpimap.org, look up the country that you're interested in, see if the data is right. If the data is wrong, find me later, please, and let me know if it's wrong. We're very interested in correcting it. But when we looked at ID systems, we saw that only a segment of the 54 actually had DPI like functions, in the sense that they had digital authentication functions, they were used across use cases, and they were active and in plan. The shift in studying these systems requires governments to be equipped with better tools for measurement. And that's where we start talking about public value. So when we speak about infrastructure and not just digital systems, we know that the value is societal. We know it's for all of society, it's for economic growth, but we don't know how to measure these shifts. So some of the apparent benefits and impacts of DPI are something like this. It increases fiscal resilience, it enables better public services, enables economic development, shifts competition and unlocks innovation, and also reinforces sovereignty. But how do we measure specifically, David EO, moving from an ID system that only the tax department runs to an ID system that is the same ID system used by all of government, but now should be able to measure how it's shaping a market, not reacting to a market. And that could look like, how do we measure the change of the cost of inputs in ways that may reshape the market. And an example is lowering costs of doing your KYC across systems rather than in just one vertical process. So, our hypothesis and our intervention from this research is that the shift is not only at the technical level, it's at the governance level and at the level of trying and understanding how these digital systems affect public values in general. Measurement is a really good way to try and articulate this public value. And what's part of the process is also focusing and articulating more of what this intangible governance attribute criteria look like. Um, so, so I'll end with this by saying that DPI as shared infrastructure requires changing how we design, govern, finance, and measure digital systems in government. Thank you. You'll have found QR codes through my presentation, but this is also my email ID in case you're interested in discussing this more. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Christina. And you can go in the ID for Africa app to the slide. Taking questions for both Christina and Raja's presentation momentarily.
Higher, please. Okay, thank you. Can we have the people who would recognize themselves as civil society, academia, people who are working on human rights, digital rights? Can you show your hand, please? Okay, great, thank you. And can we have private sector technology providers? Can I see show of hand? Okay, I did see some people haven't put their hands up, so I'm very curious. But at least it gives me a sense of the room and how we are placed. Um, Christina has done a wonderful job of laying out DPI and how we should, it's a shared infrastructure. It's not about the technology, but it's about building it with an infrastructure mindset. Knowing that we are a very ID kind of ecosystem over here, I'll focus on ID, but I'm also constantly talking about DPI. So please pardon me if I keep switching between ID and DPI because ID is so foundational to what DPI is and everything is built on top of it. The trust which comes from ID permeates to the layers on top of it. If you can go to the next slide, please. So I'm here representing UNDP. I play two hats. I work on the DPI of UNDP, but I'm also here talking about Universal Safeguards. This is an initiative which is stewarded by UNDP and Office of the Digital and Emerging Technologies. And we will hear from the Undersecretary and the Special Envoy shortly on what he thinks. So what does building trusted system means? There are a couple of, I would say there is a method to this madness and we will talk about it. If you can go to the next slide. And this is where I would request you to show the video. This is from the Undersecretary, Mr. Ramandeep Gill, and he's a special tech envoy on digital and emerging technologies.
Distinguished participants, esteemed colleagues. In September, a few months ago, UN member states adopted the Pact for the Future. A few months ago, UN member states adopted the Pact for the Future. The Pact is a milestone agreement laying out the vision for international cooperation to meet the challenges in the years ahead. A central component of the Pact is the Global Digital Compact, which agrees on a shared commitment to shape our digital future in line with universal principles. Within this Global Digital Compact, member states made a clear and urgent call to advance the development of safe, inclusive, and trusted digital public infrastructure. They emphasized the need to increase investments in DPI and called for the creation of safeguards to ensure that these systems
They're a very small team and they had competing priorities, so they sent this video message. So thank you, Undersecretary. Like Amandeep Gill mentioned, this is a key message that we are sending to all the implementing authorities that you cannot do DPI without the safeguards in it. Also, the realization that we have had as an initiative in the last 6 months is our implementing authorities are doing some of these guardrails, but they don't know that they're putting in the guardrails, and they're also not probably communicating it to the people. So we are also educating both the implementing authorities and the civil society to be able to come to the table and talk. And this is one of those convenings where we hope we all learn this common language and we can move forward. Yes, if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. The next slide. This when we started doing our work with those 44 multi-stakeholders, some of them are here. We have Matthew, who was a civil society advocate sitting as one of the working group member. We have PS Sambo from Malawi, who was also a working group member last year. They discussed what is all the risks which we have seen in some of the DPI implementation, and we have bucketed them in three different categories. There is the risk of safety. You could have physical safety, you could have digital insecurity. Very many times we have found that our names, our numbers, they're all found in like the dark web, in places that it shouldn't be, like people are contacting you. It makes you think like what's happening to our data. There is also the issues of exclusion which takes place. People feel that they're not part of the system. They don't know how to get enrolled itself because the policies are not clear. They ask for very onerous documents. There is an onerous fee to get part of it. There are not real ways of getting redressal. There is also structural vulnerabilities. When we go and look at like our data protection authority or our ICT policies, and we look for safety to be in it, some of them may be lacking or they're not giving us the cover that it should be. They could also be built in a very unsustainable way. A big discussion that we've been having is should there be an expiry date in some of the IDs? Should there be expiry dates of chips? What is the use of having a chip? These are all trade offs and decisions that your implementing authorities take, but these all mean sustainability and financial implications for these programs to continue. If you can go to the next slide, please. We have been working with a lot of African countries over the last 8 months. And a common theme that we keep saying in Africa, because this is ID for Africa, so we wanted to share it with you, is this massive digital divide. We don't have access to internet. We don't have access to smartphones. It seems to have been built for smartphones. We don't know how to use these itself. I don't know what is ID being used for. Is ID only being used for identifying me, or is it for elections, or what is it being used for? There is also low institutional capacity, like even government doesn't have sometimes a lot of capacity to be able to start strategizing what all we could do on top of it. And there is also weak rule of law. We have also seen that during the design and implementation, there could be unsustainable choices. Like this can't sustain for 8 years. This can't sustain for 10 years. This can't sustain for 15 years. How do you build on these things? And then there's a lack of whole of government approach. Even people in the government are not talking to each other. They seem to be working in silos. And there is a lack of public value, which Christina spoke about. We think of it just as an ID, but we're not thinking about ID as a foundational element for a lot of other things that can be built on top of it, like for health, like for agriculture, like for tourism, like for trade. If you can go to the next slide, please. And what this does is this creates a lot of governance and inclusion issues. And this is at the heart of trust building. This is at the heart of inclusion. Important questions needs to be asked at the right time. Who operates this? Who maintains this? Who pays for it? Every time you authenticate me with my ID, am I paying? Is somebody else paying? Who is going to uphold the law and the institution? Which law institution is going to uphold this? How will we sustain this? There's lots of questions that we should all be asking, and the government has to answer us, and the government should answer to say that we've thought through all of these things. Sometimes we don't even share these elements. If you can come to the next slide. Many of you would remember this was a question which was asked by Joseph Attic on the first day, and all of you polled. There were like about 200 people who gave your answers. See how interesting it is. The room is divided. You were asked, how should the identity authority be financed? 47% of you said it should be government funded, but there is 30% of you who spoke about public private partnership. It's a trade off. There needs to be national discussions on this. What is the merit of doing public partnership? What is the merit of doing a predominantly government funded? So there needs to be discussion with the people, for the people. The other question, which was very interesting, and there were like 5 of those, I love these questions. What is the most appropriating reporting structure? Many of you, 56% of you chose independent commission, but there were also 43% of you who chose that there should be an executive oversight or it should be with a line ministry. So these are discussions that you should be looking at. If you can go to the next slide. We ask for a whole of society approach where everybody comes together and works and asks these questions, especially the role of civil society, the role of advocates, the role of technology providers. Everybody have a role in this so that you can ask the questions that needs to be asked and the government also shares the answers that it needs to answer. This is the who, which is in the framework. If you can go to the next slide. And what are you asking? What are you guiding towards? What are you looking at and making these conversations? It's a set of principles. On the left, you have foundational principles that all implementing authorities should live up to. It is do no harm, do not exclude, give redressal mechanisms. A lot more is available on the DPISafeguards.org, and I'll share the QR code at the end of this. So all ID authorities or your payment authorities or your data exchange authorities, and especially the ICT ministries, are called to uphold these principles as we go along. And I will show you what and how to interpret this. If you can go to the next slide. When should this be upheld? This should be upheld throughout the life cycle, but specifically during the strategy and the design of it. When you're thinking, it is best to be uploaded. It is better to be adapted, because once you have done this, you have started losing the trust of the people. You can still fix it, but it is best done during the design stage. Can you go to the next slide? And the last is principles. Do no harm means, okay, I don't know what to think about it. So in the framework we have given, do not discriminate means have informed consent, have legal protection. So we've given methods. So for civil society, for government authorities over here, if you don't understand the principles, there are very specific processes and practices that you can download and use it. Can you go to the next slide? And it comes like this. The framework is who should do it, when should they do it, what should they do, how should they do it, and for what, which risk are we mitigating. This is a living body of knowledge. We would love for your feedback, and our working group members also will come back and talk about this little later, but you please go play with it and give us feedback on how to take this forward. Thank you.
All right, we're gonna go to some Q&A, and I'm gonna invite Christina up as well on stage. You can yeah. um, yeah, feel free to add. We're gonna be here for a few minutes, and then we're gonna transition to our government panel. Um, so I see the first question here. DPI requires a different way of designing and implementing. To what extent are governments actually making this shift in the way that they work across agencies? Yeah, yes.
Thank you. Like I mentioned, one of our big recognitions was that some of the governments are making a very conscious decision to make the change. You will hear South Africa's Mr. Tulani, who will come and talk about how South Africa is going about building its DPI roadmap. You will hear from PS Sambo from Malawi on how they are doing some things differently from a digital ID perspective. You will hear from Landre from Nigeria, and he will talk about what they're doing very differently to bring people from the remote parts of Nigeria into the ID enrollment. So there are implementing authorities who are consciously making this decision. We also heard about Ethiopia. Today morning, we met NIDP head Yodahe, and we've given him a recommendation that he should bring multi-stakeholder, the civil society also into the conversation, though they are already doing focus groups. It is happening. The good thing is, like Amandeep Gill spoke about, 193 countries have signed for safeguards in their Global Digital Compact. So, over the next 5 years, an ecosystem of people who are also sitting in this room, including co-develop UNDP, we are working so that all countries are able to adopt safeguards and build this capacity.
Awesome. Thank you. I see a next question here. Uh, interesting one. In the case of Kenya, both M-Pesa and PesaLink are mentioned in the list that makes a digital system DPI. What are their distinct roles? I think that's to you, Christina.
Yeah. I want to say I'm surprised with the question, but I'm not. I left it on the slide so that someone asks me about it. No, we've had this discussion obviously multiple times, and if you notice on the slide, we didn't call something a DPI or something not a DPI, and we did that on purpose. It's because in order to call something a DPI, you need to define for what do you want to do with the outcome that you classify something as DPI or not, and that's why we put them on the list. Um, Going into the Kenyan example of M-Pesa and PesaLink, M-Pesa treated as a mobile wallet, PesaLink as a government operated payment switch, um, where the distinction that we made was that one is publicly operated, owned and operated, and one is not. One may be regulated publicly, but that does not necessarily mean the same thing as public operation. Something that we held close to our measurement of public interest values is whether or not the public sector had a defined role in operating the digital system that is meant to deliver public services. If there is a segment of the population that's sufficient enough that depends on a private system to access a certain service, so it may be. If they can be regulated in a meaningful way, then they could be DPI. But in order to provision against the risk that they can't be regulated sufficiently, we require for there to be a more active involvement of a public interest operator, which is why we didn't classify M-Pesa by itself as a DPI on the DPI map, not in the slide, but on the map. And that's the same rule that we applied across the world. But this is a debate that's up for discussion. So, Robert and anyone else, please find me after the session. I'd love to engage further. Thank you.
Um, Thank you very much, Christina. I see a few more questions coming in. So I'm going to take them in order. So the first one is, what has been the biggest challenge that you see in hindering DPI safeguards adoption? And yeah, so we'll go there and then we'll come back.
Thank you. Um, I'll probably I'll paint a picture for you guys. Think you have 100 guests sitting outside hungry, and you are only like four people cooking for the entire 100 people, and you need to get all the plates out to serve to those 100 people. And imagine you walking in. That is how a typical DPI implementation is. There's a lot of chaos. There is no time to sit and think. I think governments also have like KPIs and time. They need to meet some indicators, enrollment methodologies, etc. So at the middle of all of this chaotic kitchen, we are asking them like, take a moment, go slow, bring your guests from outside the kitchen into the kitchen and ask them what food they need before you serve it up. I think that is the analogy of what's happening from a DPI safeguards adoption at this point in time. But what I hope, and this is why the DPI Safeguards Initiative helps, is both of you, the civil society and the government authority, now has common vocabulary. When you say do no harm, you both know what do no harm means in your country's context. We just spoke about do not discriminate. So you both are saying, I'm asking for informed consent. Can you give me informed consent? So both of you have a vocabulary to talk to each other, and when you go into the kitchen and you know it is chaotic, you're able to talk that language, not saying, I want this, etc. So we hope that this is a vocabulary. Both of you will be able to have constructive conversations. And I would also say there is fear on both sides. Civil society feels that they are not heard. Government fears that they are being scolded, told upon, etc. And I'm being honest. So this is a way that we break and have constructive conversations. And Matthew, you could talk about constructive conversations.
Um, No, I think this is a really important part of it. I mean, I think actually tomorrow we're going to be hosting a workshop here, entirely focusing this problem as to how do we cultivate more effective partnership in the implementation and rollout of digital ID systems. Precisely because in many ways, and this is something that we'll talk about some more tomorrow. I think a lot of say that some of the fallout and the pushback um, is actually when you in observations and the conversations with different stakeholders is that people are actually working in many cases working for similar things, but maybe using different language. So on the civil society side, we will talk about exclusion. Here's the communities that are not participating. Here are the issues that we're worried about. Here are the harms that we want to avert. But then you talk to government implementers, and what do they talk about? Enrollment. I need to drive up enrollment. I want people to participate in the system. But exclusion and enrollment are two sides of the same coin, both oriented towards a goal of figuring out how do we get people to participate fully in in our society. And yet oftentimes we aren't able to have discussion about how we solve that problem. So I do think that some of the sense making around civil society being adversarial to some of this topic is not necessarily there, because in many cases what they are fighting for is participation of the specific communities, and I think how we try to engage them but also pull those two things together is important. So I know we are running out of time for this segment. I see two important questions that I want to touch on. One is this idea of defining DPI, and whose definition, etc. And then this other one about private sector participation. That's being encouraged, but can there be private sector governance in DPI? And what does that, how do we get to reinforcing customer protection realities? So I'll give definitions to you, Christina, and then Raji, if you want to talk about the private sector stuff, and I can also jump on that.
You. The controversial question. um, the definition of DPI matters, but not because of the definition itself, because of the implications it has on who you invite into the kitchen with you uh, once you define DPI. So, obviously, countries are free to define their own DPI. When the G20 did this exercise 2 years ago and asked different governments to submit a list of their DPIs, one government submitted 99, another government submitted 7. There's no authority to say one is not DPI, the other one is. What matters is what are the implications if you call something a DPI when in fact it's a digital system. And who else do you bring on board as a partner who has the same version of DPI as you? So if your DPI and your country's DPI has public values, has public interest values, in addition to technology, it means you're bringing more consultative people on board. If not, then there are folks who are only focusing on the technology bit of it, which, as we discussed, DPI is clearly more.
I'll make this really quick. Hello? Okay. I'll make this really quick. Private sectors sometimes get the bad rap or the rap for being in the gray area. They are in it for themselves. So when private sector can put the societal value and can bring in the sense of competition, innovation, which is what DP is supposed to, in its right sense, unleash, then they're more than happy. They should be on the table. They should be on the table talking about this. But your civil society and your government both need to see you as an equal partner, be sitting on the table with them. Private sector should not just work with government entities alone, but you should also work with civil society very, very closely and bring their consumer protection voice to the government implementers. When Elizabeth Attori, who will come and talk a little later, in Uganda, when we had a multi-stakeholder convening, we saw that in Uganda, working with the telecom, the top 3 telecom players in Uganda is a very, very important part of getting DPI safe and inclusive in Uganda. So now she is working on building partnership with private sector so that private sector also works with us. I'm sure Mr. Tulani is going to talk about what South Africa is doing from a private sector perspective. There are very many different people, but I would say the values, societal values, is what drives your right side of the platform.
All right. Well, thank you, Raja. Thank you, Christina. We'll move on to the next segment, but can we give these two a round of applause, please? Okay. All right. So we've got some academic grounding. We talked about some of the global movements. We're now going to go to get very grounded in country and looking at, well, what are some of the leading ID implementers thinking about and how they're approaching this question of safeguards, multi-stakeholder collaboration. And to have that discussion, I'm going to invite three persons onto the stage and we're just going to have a very candid discussion on some of the issues. So first up, please join me inviting Permanent Secretary Sambo from the National Registration Bureau of Malawi. Also will be joining us is Lanry Yusuf, the Director for Information Technology and Identity Database in the National Identification Management Commission of Nigeria. Okay. And lastly, Tulani Mapsto, who's the Deputy Director General for the Department of Home Affairs of South Africa. Awesome. Oh, thanks. Okay. We have this nice. Tulani. Okay. All right. All right. Thank you. Please have a seat. We have so many chairs up here. Whoops. Okay. All right. We will sort that out. Okay. Let me just move these down. Yeah, too many things. Crowded floor. All right. Um, and please continue to add your questions to Slido. I'm gonna kick off with a few to the panel, but then also invite and kind of incorporate some of the other questions as we move through. Um, yes, I want to start with you actually, because Malawi has accomplished something that is, I think, the envy of most of us in this room. The level of adoption that you've accomplished with your ID, over 85% in your country context. Can you give us a sense of how Malawi achieved this level of adoption in your work of its national ID, and what have been some of the most critical decisions in ultimately achieving that?
Uh, Thank you very much. Let me confirm that Malawi, we have achieved 100% of the adult population.
Please clap. Please clap.
In fact, Malawi ID registration starts with birth registration, and together we have covered over 75% of the population. We are remaining with a small segment for the children below 16 years old.
Mhm.
It has been a journey,
Mm.
um, but all I can say is that it has been a very inclusive approach. And looking at the provisions of the DPI safeguards, we have we have actually been involving including the DPI safeguards during the implementation of the success of the ID digital ID uh, enrollments. Um, we have some challenges,
Mm.
but we have managed to solve most of the challenges, considering that we have been exposed to the DPI safeguards. For example, building of the trust, we have been engaging the multi-stakeholders, collaborating with all the stakeholders that are involved in the digital ID space. For example, the members of parliament, the civil societies, including the academia, engagement with the private sector, of course, taking advantage of what other initiatives we can learn from them. But most importantly, also is the engagement with the people themselves, the communities. that required a lot of civic education to ensure that we have an inclusive approach and a trust in the digital ID. But let me also talk about one thing to ensure that the trust is there with our system. We have been inclusive by removing the cost of accessing the ID.
Okay.
So ID access in Malawi is currently free. And of course, this required a lot of consultations with the stakeholders. Lastly, let me talk about the complaints management system, the call center. So people have trust in the digital ID in Malawi because we have a front office that engages with the people through the call center, and the system for that allows every complaint that is lodged to us to be recorded. Thank you.
No, awesome. Thank you very much, PS. Maybe I'll just ask a follow-up question. And I think you gave us a number of different ideas, the link to birth registration, the kind of consultations that you did, this idea of this front office, this call center, and then the cost. Is there a specific community group that was particularly difficult for you to bring in? And how did you manage to maneuver that?
Yeah, when you look at the beliefs, traditions, and even religious beliefs, sometimes you might have such challenges. But all in all, our public engagement team has been very, very strong and very solid enough to ensure that most of the issues or misconceptions around the digital ID are cleared along the implementation process.
No, thank you. Thank you. Um, Lanre, I want to come to you and Nigeria now. Because Nigeria is a large and diverse country. How are you thinking about designing for all of these different stakeholders, your ID initiative and the rollout that you guys have been pursuing in your country context?
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody.
Mhm.
As you rightly said, um, Nigeria had the highest population in Africa.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that's a good thing, but it's challenging. Um, it's challenging in the sense that you have a large landmass that you have to cover. And when you talk of DPI, there's no DPI without identity. And in this case, foundational identity. There are different agencies that do functional that have functional duties that also have ID programs, but all must ride on a foundational identity. That's the only way that you can get uniqueness. You can make sure that there are no duplicate records. So it's a Herculean task in Nigeria because of the landmass, because of the connectivity issue, which is not only in Nigeria, I think it's across Africa. When you talk of literacy, adoption of technology, and all these challenges. So, but Nigeria has gradually started making roadways. Enrollment figures are up in the last 2 to 3 years exponentially because of the involvement of some of our development partners, including the World Bank on the ID for the project, whereby enrollment now being incentivized, whereby we partner with public sectors in assisting to capture the population. You only get paid based on a successful, unique record that you have added to the database. So, but again, because of the DPI safeguard, whereby inclusivity is key, I want to make sure that nobody is left behind. So uh, the president has taken this up also because governance is also key. And when there's no political will, there's no how that you can actually have a functioning uh, foundation identity system. So in our own case, we have that, can I say, we have the positivity coming from the government, the support. And so there's recently a presidential directive that the ID agency, in this case, NIMSI, should go into the hinterland, go to all the wards in Nigeria. The wards are communities.
Yeah.
And we have like identified 8,809 wards in Nigeria. So we have to have representation in each of these wards to make sure that everybody is captured, because of making sure that that inclusivity is in it, nobody is left behind. But again, that also creates challenges about connectivity, about literacy. Yeah, there are remote areas whereby they don't even know anything about ID. But because ID now is tied to most of the government benefits and social programs, people are waking up and saying that, okay, uh, since government is coming to my doorstep now to enroll me, I need to get on board. Also, there is a school feeding program whereby children need to be fed in school. And for you to do that, you must have a national identification number. So these are all programs that government is assisting to make sure that you're getting everybody on board. So,
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Lenry. I want to follow up on that. I mean, you kind of brought us into a couple of different things. You talked about some of the partnerships, these either use of incentives and that sort of thing. Um, Going into the wards. I know you recently had a workshop, a workshop to kind of get inputs and learning from different stakeholders. Can you share a little bit more about that workshop and some of that kind of work that you've been doing?
yes, um, workshops are necessary because you have different stakeholders. And the only way that you can ensure adoption is bringing everybody on board. So painstakingly, because this costs money, and you have all this also into agencies, challenges, everybody is trying to uh, protect their own turf. So workshop and government directive is, in this case, the government has directed that there will be harmonization. And also, you must ensure that the citizens get value from this digital identity. Citizens are not supposed to be subjected to multiple biometric captures. They can't have the foundation identifier, which is the name. And I want to go and get my driver's license, I still need to provide my biometric. I want to be issued a passport, I provide my biometrics. I want to be issued a SIM card. So what government is doing with this workshop is to make sure that there's harmonization, that every other functional agencies should ride on the foundational identifier to make sure that citizens get value and the burden on the citizens are reduced. Also, government doesn't want to keep paying different automated biometric system on different agencies. So once you have one,
Yeah.
everybody rides and plug in on that.
Okay. Thank you very much. I was gonna go to South Africa next, but I wanna this one little point I want to start with because I think this is gonna be something very interesting in the room, and I don't want to leave it till too late. But you talk about the linkage with all of these different systems. Enrollment. Nigeria has been one of those interesting places where your enrollment process has continued to evolve, since it was first kind of initiated, whether it is listening, conversations with different actors. Can you talk a little bit about how Nigeria's enrollment process has changed and what prompted some of those changes?
Okay, thank you very much. Um, Change is the only constant. So you cannot keep doing the same thing every day and expect a different result. So what Nigeria had done over the years is that we actually started with the Windows enrollment application. And to the credit of Nigerians, our enrollment systems were locally designed by Nigerians. So because we wanted also to uh, move with technology, move with changes, we ended up introducing Android enrollment system. What that does for us is that it allows mobility. You can move easily instead of carrying your different components of enrollment. Now you have one all-in-one device on your tablet, on your system. You can move around and enroll. And by extension, also, COVID has also taught us some lessons that, again, the conventional biometrics capturing need to be improved on. Then we introduced the contactless enrollment devices as well. So with enrollment, there are also additional factor now that people need to modify their records. So you need to make provisions for people to be able to do that. We also developed a self-service modification platform whereby at the comfort of your own house and offices, you can verify yourself for validate that you're in the database biometrically, then you can make changes. So we've seen enrollment moved exponentially. As at yesterday, we're at 120,980,000.
Wow.
Constant literacy.
Wow. Thank you very much. We move to South Africa. Um, Deputy Gigi, thank you for being patient. Um, South Africa has been leading this year, particularly through your presidency of the G20. And recently, you launched the My Mzansi program, which is really at the heart of your DPI roadmap. Could you share with us a little bit about how this whole of government transformation is being led and what that has looked like for you all?
No, thank you very much for that. So, I think for many years, there's been initiatives that have been happening at different departments. I think the issue of fragmentation, I think most people talk about it, that there's various initiatives that are implemented and there's no coherence within one government, for an example. So what the Office of the President has done, taken over that particular process and said, we are going to drive the digital roadmap for the country. And what it means is that we will bring various role players. For an example, for Home Affairs, we provide source data on citizens' information. Then obviously there are other departments like the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies. They are driving that particular strategy together with the Office of the President to ensure that one, we are able to create synergy, but we also create leverage on digital infrastructure. For an example, for many years that other government departments, let's take a Department of Education, if they want to enrollment of students, they will then have to authenticate those students with the Department of Home Affairs. So we have to leverage. So we utilize that public infrastructure for them to say the application that they would have developed must work to authenticate with us. So what the president is saying is that yes, including that, it must therefore be driven at the central place that all components of the state talk to each other, because it's not only that. We've had, I think, for a number of years, initiatives where we've also dealt with digital payments. These are social security. They're also authenticated. I mean, during COVID, we had to create a number of social security grants that people were receiving them, whether they were refugees, asylum seekers. So we are the only ones who could authenticate in that regard. So that Rhyme Sunset digital roadmap talks to the whole of government laying under one umbrella with different components of what needs to be done. Recently, we are working with the Reserve Bank precisely to create digital payment systems to ensure that there are a lot of people who are invisible in the digital payment world. So we want also to ensure that there's visibility there.
Yeah, no, thank you. Um, and building on that, this strategy that the South Africa really recently launched, I also just want to bring in your advocacy on the safeguards piece. You guys are doing it both at the G20 level, but also within your strategy. Can you talk a little bit about this idea of putting the citizen at the center of that work and what that has meant for you and why you're taking that approach?
Yes, remember, in the process, you ought to not be reckless around citizens' data. Unfortunately, we promulgated a legislation that is responsible for protection of personal information. So it's also important that we create mechanisms for citizens to be able to give authorization for the utilization of their data. Let's take for an example, if someone goes to a bank today in South Africa, the bank must then get the person to give consent that they must be verified against Home Affairs. In other words, because the data we collect, the law says you must utilize it for the purpose it was collected for. So we cannot just willy-nilly. So those safeguards around data management becomes very important. So then the client says to a bank, yes, you can authenticate me because I want to be able to transact with the bank. Then the bank comes to us and say, I'm now going to open the account for this individual, but we've been given consent around that. So it's very important because if we create open, platforms for data to be accessed, and we are creating huge challenges around privacy uh, of individuals, which are enshrined in the constitution. Not only in South Africa, I think all governments do not want their citizens' data to be flying around. So those are some of the issues that we are putting forward in terms of the conversation we have around putting safeguards on data management.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. And what I'm hearing is there's the legislative protection of it. That's obviously mandating kind of the different uses and where who is the authoritative source of information, but then now working with the different actors to kind of operationalize that and enforce it through the systems. Thank you
Yes.
very much.
Maybe just a last comment on that. Remember, one of the biggest issues, and I talked about it yesterday in one of the platforms, is the issue of creating trust between the states and the citizens. And in the absence of the trust, you then they're not going to want to utilize those particular platforms because at what point do I deposit my personal information that can also be transferred to private hands without the knowledge? So the issue of creating digital trust between the state as an actor and the youth and the citizens becomes very important in this regard.
No,
Thank you very
absolutely.
much.
Okay. Thank you so much, DG. All right. So I'm gonna bring in I have more questions, but I'm gonna bring in some of what you all have been positing. And also if there are more, please come together and add more. So one, I'm gonna maybe start with a couple. So this first one, which I think all of you can speak to, which is, how do we ensure that ID systems and progress can withstand political changes and turmoil, change of administration, change of policy direction? How do we safeguard the systems? So that's one I'll open up to everyone. And I think, yes, Sambo, there are a couple of questions for you on Malawi, but I'll maybe pull out this one, which is really, with the success of the ID enrollment, what do you see as the next critical step for getting maximum value? So I'll open up to each of you. We'll take these two, and then we'll bring in a few more.
Thank you. Having registered everyone, what next? We have to um, bring in use cases or enhance the available use cases. I can mention that there is an agricultural component for affordable input program. We use the national ID to authenticate the beneficiary. There are also social cash transfers and as well as the voter registration, even the whole electoral process. We are enhancing the use of the national ID, the digital ID to be used for such cases. For example, during the voter registration that we have just completed in Malawi, we use the digital ID to digitally verify any potential voter to be registered. So the legal framework is very clear, and we make sure that we are working within the provisions of the law. So we have the National Registration Act. The Data Protection Act has just been passed a few months ago. So we have a data protection law, and there are regulations that are governing that. However, there have been some inconsistencies, like the Data Protection Act has been passed at the very end, while the Registration Act was passed prior, and it doesn't recognize most of the digital initiatives. And we are revising the law to ensure that we are working within the within what we are now, the changes of the digital space. To enhance the use of the digital ID, like working with the Electoral Commission, we had to sign a memorandum of understanding. This is one way of also ensuring that we are bringing in a use case and we are bringing in a stakeholder to work together through a memorandum of understanding, and that created trust that eventually the Electoral Commission accepted the use of the digital ID to verify or authenticate a user. The other question of what we did to register everyone, I am seeing that the time is going, but very quickly, let me just say that we used stakeholder engagement as a key issue. So we work with the Minister of Local Government, which is above all the chiefs. And we work with the chiefs and we work with the parliament. So the politicians, we meet them there. We work with all other stakeholders to ensure that we achieve the good numbers of enrollment as well as maintain the trust. And we keep engaging these people all the time. Lastly, let me just also mention that for us to achieve all this, we are engaging with the not local stakeholders alone, but we are also working with the development partners like the UNDP. We thank them for their support. The World Bank is also coming there to support us with setting up of the front end offices, even the support of the back end. So this has been how we have achieved all this. Thank you very much.
You, as in your remarks earlier, you said the only thing that is constant is change. So we received a question about change, political change. How do you think about that within the work? And there are different kinds of risks change. There's technology change, social change, etc. But how do we safeguard these systems that we're building? Any thoughts that you have on that? And then I'll.
Thank you very much. For the current ID program in Nigeria, we can say that it has come to stay because it has gone through three administration, the
Oh,
third
wow.
administration, and we have consistently had support for this program. And one thing that we've also been able to do is that if the projected population is 250, they are about 200 to 250, and we've reached 120 milestone, we've crossed the 50% margin.
Okay.
So I don't think any government will come in play now to try to revive that program. Moreover, because digital ID is tied to your passport, which has international implications. People have their visas, the NINI is tied to your passport number. So no reasonable government, and I hope I'm not quoted, will come and try to, yes, so that I don't get into trouble, will try to reverse the achievement made so far. So yeah, I can confidently say that the ID program has come to stay in Nigeria. And moreover, we've visited other governments that have a stable ID program, like the Aadhaar in India, where we visited twice with 1.45 billion people in the database. So no reasonable government in India either will try to start a new ID program. So thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. Is NIMSI an independent authority? Do you report to a minister? What is the?
Yes, initially we are under the presidency,
Okay.
right? But right now we are under the Ministry of Interior. So we report to the federal ministry. Yes.
All right. No, thank you. Delani, change.
Yes. No, thank you very much. Well, where there's change, most of us, in our case, it has been positive change. Um, the digital ID systems like Nigeria has gone through 3 elections.
Yeah.
We launched in 2013, in July on the 18th. And then since then, we've had elections in 2014, 2019, and 2024. The interesting part with 2024 is that it came with a different term of government, where we're the government of national unity.
Yeah.
So now you have a minister who's no longer from the previous governing party, but from the former previous opposition party. But the interesting thing about that is that when also you have younger generation of ministers,
Mm.
they are easy to adopt the use of technology
Yeah.
because they're not too scared
Mhm.
about certain things than compared to the older generation who
Yeah.
would say,
Yeah.
cybersecurity issues slow down here and so forth.
Mm.
So in this instance, for us, it has been a very positive change because we are moving more to online and digital platform, utilizing AI, machine learning. I mean, we have had delays in a number of the areas like your visa adjudication, for an example. So the introduction of an AI and machine learning platform, it means that if I'm able to put an application through an AI enabled
Mm.
visa system, it therefore needs less human intervention in terms of doing the adjudication because if I'm dealing with you on the internet, I should be able to find your profile quicker through AI and say this is a frequent traveler. These are it's not a flight risk. It's not a so therefore the person is not potential to overstay or violate visa conditions. So that's where the space we find ourselves in. It's quite a positive change.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I see we have 46 seconds, so I won't be able to slip in another question. But with the time, I just want to say, to ask for you all to give a round of applause for our panel. Um, I think each of them in their different ways kind of iterated the different multi-stakeholder approaches and how that's been creating value. The idea of trust as being central, but recognizing that both at very large scales and kind of medium to smaller size scales that we can figure out how to do this through partnership, through different types of modalities. And I think each of the countries represent different examples that we can take into our respective work. So thank you all, gentlemen, for joining us. And please set up. Thank you. Thank you. Testing. Okay. All right. So we went slow. We had different kinds of experiences that we learned about today, the academic, the global. We got specific to the country. Now we're going to go and kind of explore some of the perspectives on the so more back to the civil society side and kind of step through a number of experiences that from different parts of the continent, from persons that are leading work, but also some of our multilateral and technology partners that are working on that. So this is where we go to the speed parts. So we're going to have a couple rapid fire perspectives on this, and then we're going to come back to some questions. So we're going to start with Elizabeth Atori, who is a legal officer for the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights in Uganda. Please welcome you, Elizabeth, onto the stage for me.
Thank you very much, Matthew. My purpose here is simple. It's to share how, as civil society in Uganda, we are implementing safeguards, particularly looking at DPI implementation within the country. So I work for an organization which is called the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights. And our work focuses on the intersection between digital ID systems using and the access to services, so health, education, social protection, just for some context. And the way we are approaching implementation is really to foster partnerships with the various responsible authorities. One being governments, the second one being communities, and also private sector. And we do this through various approaches. One is the multi-stakeholder approach, which is really to ensure that we are bringing all the various stakeholders to the same table to be able to contribute to the implementation of these programs. We've managed to be able to do that very recently, and Raja did refer to that. The other way where we are working closely is to be able to push for greater access to digital ID systems, particularly within the community. So we have piloted mobile registration clinics, understanding that one of the key barriers to access is usually that these registration clinics are far for the communities to reach. And we had recently a 4-day registration clinic, which had 230 IDs issued. And these were those IDs that people went to get registered, but they did not come and pick up the ID. So 81 of them were fresh registrations, 32 were just to have their IDs updated. But this speaks to the scale of the problem around access. If we spend 4 days and we manage to get that magnitude of people interested and to come and access the services, what more can be done for if we were to spend might be a week getting these services closer to the people? For civil society, we currently lead a digitalization and human rights consortium at the national level that is pushing civil society in Uganda to address challenges and how safeguards within the digital ID enrollment process. At the international level, we are a member of the Human Rights for ID coalition, which is a transnational coalition of civil society organizations that currently are looking at specific issues around digital identity. And we came up with a common position around whether we should have mandatory ID or not. What principles should drive mandatory ID adoption? And we are happy to share that with everyone. For the community perspective, we know particularly that communities are important in this particular process because they are the beneficiaries of the ID systems and DPI. But oftentimes they are unaware of the developments that are going on, or they do not know the processes that they need to take. So we are working together with community volunteers in Uganda to drive awareness of DPI, to be able to also support those that do not have access yet to get onto the system. So our approach, as you will notice, is multi-pronged because we understand that different stakeholders have a different role to play. We can't only focus on government. We need communities on board. We need civil societies capacity built to be able to engage with governments and private sector. And that's something that we are going to focus on for the next 1 year. How do we sustain that engagement? How do we sustain multi-stakeholderism? And I think my time is done. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Is Bhaskar here? I'm not seeing him. Okay, all right. So we're gonna keep going through our rapid fires. I'm gonna invite up Arun Gurumurthy, who is the Chief Strategy Officer for MOSIP and OpenGTP, and he's gonna talk about how they're thinking about safeguards at the technology level. Let's welcome up Arun on stage, please.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Good afternoon to you all. Uh, I don't think it bears repeating the importance of and the potential of digital identity, uh, and also the need for safeguards. Right, Raja and Christina did a wonderful job of articulating its importance, and the panel also informed us about how governments are looking at it. Uh, Technology that the governments use for digital identity probably plays the most important role in ensuring safeguards or in lack of safeguards as well, right? Uh, MOSIP has had humble beginnings, but then now MOSIP plays a pivotal role in identity-led development. Over 13 countries are adopting MOSIP at national scale. We are en route to 500 million people on board MOSIP systems. FIDA, which is Ethiopia's identity system, is based on MOSIP. What this means is that alignment with safeguards is not negotiable for a system which supports and provides so many critical national infrastructure projects, right? With this perspective, MOSIP went about studying the DPI safeguards framework itself and checking on how we align with the safeguards right at the design and feature level. The finding is that there is a strong alignment. The design choices that we have made meets several expectations of the safeguards framework. It has also thrown light on very important things that continues to be in focus. Uh, the devil is in the details, right? What does it mean for a technology provider to aid DPI safeguards? Just to take some select examples, right? When we talk about inclusion, technology should have the capability to operate in an offline mode, in a low resource, low bandwidth mode. MOSIP enables that, right? The technology should be mobile. Uh, Respected gentleman from Malawi said that we the technology reaches people where they are. Technology should be mobile. It should reach people where there are constraints, right? And there needs to be flexibility. What does flexibility mean? Especially when we're talking about biometric identity systems, uh, the system should be capable of handling exceptions. What happens when somebody does not have iris or their fingerprints are not intelligible to the technical systems? There needs to be mechanisms to account for these exceptions, right? And ability to onboard undocumented people, people who may not have the traditionally required level of support or proofs. Right? MOSIP has introduced something called as an introducer mechanism, which enables a community-led vouching of identity to be able to onboard in these systems. It's not just features or design, even the processes through which software is built should also be sensitive, right? We are working with Oregon State University to identify potential exclusion points and address them. Let's take another example of privacy and security, a topic which is often talked about, but where much of the details lie in how you do it, right? Data should not be out there to be accessed willy nilly, which means that encryption becomes super important. The data should be encrypted at capture. It should remain encrypted when it's moving. It should be encrypted at rest. And any access to this data should be through formal channels like API. Any access should have an audit trail. All of these are very, very important security considerations. On privacy, consent is a very important aspect, right? Data should not move or should not be operated without being initiated by the data owner. The system should be the custodian of digital identity. And once you provide your details, the sensitive details, it should not mean that now the identity system owns that data. You should be in control. You should be able to enable access or even lock access. You should be able to visualize where all my identity is being used. There should be permanent tamper proof audit trails. All of these are important technical details that come uh, essentially through good technology solutions that governments adopt, right? Uh, what does this mean? Uh, MOSEP is a technology provider. That means that there is something more. Implementation of safeguards is a shared responsibility. Right. While technology providers can enable certain implementations, it is the implementer who has to make the choice of, let's say, enabling full transparency on where data is being used. Uh, Having said that, we still play a crucial role. We offer tools to the government to be able to implement safeguards. We offer extensive knowledge transfer to governments so that they understand. We also do offer advisory and training and ongoing support. Uh, Good technology makes it easy to adopt good policy. Yep, and this kind of help is important to even adopt the built-in safeguards, right? While tech can provide these capabilities, it's the policy choices and the operational decisions which end up defining how governments adopt the safeguards. That's where the safeguards principle becomes useful. It provides a common vocabulary, common benchmarks for both the technology provider and the technology adopter to adhere to. You now have a framework to measure yourself against. You now have a mechanism to iteratively move towards improving your systems. That's what makes this very exciting. We play a small role, but an important one. And we continue to advocate on better systems, on safer systems with governments. But then we see it as a collaborative approach. The safeguards framework has also thrown up very interesting, forward-looking uh, objectives for us. How do we enhance cryptography in the age of quantum and AI? How do we reduce costs by reusing general purpose devices, right? How do we decentralize authentication, reduce centralization, provide more and refined access to the user to be able to control more of operations of their identity. All of these are work in progress, and being an open source initiative, it also allows us to collaborate with global partners like Oregon State University, Carnegie Mellon University, Alan Turing, and this is a perfect platform for us to take this conversation forward. Let me pause here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Arun. And I see some of these questions coming in. I mean, and we're going to bring all of the rapid fire presentations back up momentarily. Um, we've heard from Elizabeth about how civil society can play a role in bringing stakeholders together and having leadership on that, helping to bridge. It's not just enrollment. Because of other factors, people may not be picking up their IDs. We heard from Arun talking about different ways that technology can enable the safeguards and also different modalities. So remote doesn't need to be an issue, offline doesn't need to be an issue, but also these questions of encryption, and we have a couple of those that have come in. um, to kind of wrap up this session, I'm going to invite up Elizabeth Garbo and bringing back Christina to talk a little bit about the working group structure and how the working group has been working together to actually update the framework to kind of bring these insights into the kind of the global setting, and then ultimately how others can contribute to that. So please welcome up Elizabeth and Christina.
Thank you. I think we do have one slide that will be coming up on screen. Hi, so I'm Elizabeth Garber. Yes, I'll sit close to you. Yes. Um, I work with a number of organizations who are working to deliver safe, interoperable digital identity around the world, most notably the OpenID Foundation, which is a standard-setting body, and City Hub, which is working specifically on how we implement safe digital identity that is also interoperable across borders. So I am also, thankfully, a working group member of the Safeguards Initiative. So now that we have been through this afternoon of presentations, can I just take a show of hands again? How many of you now feel familiar with the DPI Safeguarding Initiative? Okay, so we've made some progress, I feel. Okay, excellent. And how many of you feel like you want to get involved or learn more about it? Excellent. So we have some interested folks. Who understood digital identity systems. Yes, Christina's mic wasn't on, but it is more than the people who said that they understood digital identity systems. I think they got it on for you just at the end there. The DPI Safeguard Initiative is a global multi-stakeholder effort. It's convened, as Raji mentioned earlier, by the Office of Digital and Emerging Tech and UNDP. Last year, the framework, which I believe we should be getting a QR code up on screen at some point, but last year the framework was launched, and that included the key principles for mitigating risks of digital public infrastructure implementations and how to safeguard. It tailors the guidance to all the responsible authorities that have been identified, which were technology providers, regulators, government officials, advocates, donors, and if have we got that slide up in the no, not yet. Um, it's coming, and all the practical steps that those individuals and organizations and institutions can take throughout the DPI life cycle, from planning and strategy through to implementation and ongoing operations. This year, we have been working to take feedback from all of those authorities in the room, who are at the table or in Raji's kitchen, and we are working on building tools and techniques for enabling both the adoption and the assessment of DPI. Here, we've got it. Excellent. So we're going to do a little bit of an interactive feedback session, but also we're very eager to get your comments about the safeguards and what would be valuable to you. Participate in the room in a moment, but also please do go and have a look at our framework, and where you have feedback, please send it to the DPI Safeguards team. So this year we've got 2 working groups, as I said, and we're delivering new tools over the course of 3 phases. Christina and I are on different subgroups who are working in tandem and in an aligned manner. My working group is developing first a self-assessment tool and like an onboarding guide to help people who are interested, or countries who are interested in delivering DPI in compliance with the safeguards. So that is our first initiative. Then we're also going to be providing tools to civil society, and we'll be updating the framework itself as a combined effort between the 2 groups, and in line with the feedback that we're getting from all of you. So do you want to describe what your working group is doing? We need your mic on though first.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for staying with me for the very last bit. And thank you, Elizabeth. As Elizabeth spoke of this initiative, Safeguards, when it started as an initiative about a year and a half ago, it started from a very normative place of principles: do not harm, do not exclude, so on and so forth. As governments in the room, I'm sure no one disagrees with these principles. Everyone agrees it's good to include, it's good to keep people safe, it's good to protect and keep private data and people's information. The tricky part is when you try and actually implement these principles and try to make it more operational. So 1 year down the line now, the work of the Safeguards Initiative has become way more action oriented to try and figure out how to convert normative principles into something that's actionable. And a way both the subgroups, but especially the assessment subgroup is now looking at, is try to articulate which are outcomes against these principles that are of interest to not only governments, but also civil society, to regulators, to advocates, to technology providers, in accomplishing a certain safeguard. And how is it that they can assess that they're truly doing it and are on the right path to accomplishing a certain principle? The way we do it is a fairly consensus driven exercise. We try and come up with as many ideas as possible that governments might think through: safety, privacy, protection, so on and so forth. We also try to include other responsible authority personas, so not only governments, but also CSOs, regulators, advocates. And then we vet what looks like practical interventions that each of the stakeholders can take in that direction. Combined with the work of the adoption subgroup, It's focused on trying to come up with a toolkit and almost like a roadmap on making the safeguards a normative practice to a very practical approach to implementing DPI in a holistic way. I think that's it. We have the QR code on the screen. What you will see through that link is, I hope, the report to the Safeguards Initiative, which basically lays out all the principles and what we intend to do over the next year. And Elizabeth and my jobs over this year is going to be about creating an actionable guide along with about 10 other, no, close to 20 other experts in these subgroups to create the actionable guide. But through this process over a year, we're constantly looking for feedback on how to make it more responsive to your needs as a stakeholder and how to make it very action oriented. So feel free to write to us on the email given there. But also feel free to approach Raji, Matthew, Elizabeth, or me after this session. And we'd love to get your perspective on board and inform this practice and output as a whole.
So should we do a little bit of live feedback now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Uh,
So if you are
Matt.
willing, oh no,
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
We're gonna mix it up because we also got some questions for the previous session. So as we close the wrap, we're gonna kind of bring the audience in a little bit more. So if there are any closing comments or reflections, we're gonna take them also from the room. We'll have some roving mics. I'm actually gonna start with two questions. So one that went to you, Elizabeth. I think there's lots of interest around how you're leading this kind of engagement to bring trust in the civil registration in Uganda. So we'll ask you to speak to that. And then Arun, a couple of questions for you about MOSIP. And then also if there are any other reflections, there'll be a mic moving around if you have questions or comments on the safeguards work. So Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, Matthew, and hello to Elizabeth on the panel. Particularly around how to build trust. That takes us back to what actually builds trust. What are those stepping stones that building trust in a system? One of them is transparency, participation, accountability. For the participation, you'll know that's why we are focused on building awareness for communities. In order to participate, you need to know the ins and outs of the system. How can you move through the system? But also with government, would like to engage around transparency. How do we ensure that we are providing information to the various stakeholders? So with that, you can actually start to have very constructive dialogue around any risks or barriers in the system, and then have actionable voices where you're able to contribute. If you do that well, then you'll definitely be able to have a system that is built on trust. But before that, then there's a lot of mistrust. And if there's no accountability for that, then there'll be challenges. The second question, I think, is a very hard question to ask civil society, because there is a critique around us being enemies of progress, not wanting development, hindering development. And Matthew did touch in the beginning around that. That is false. We do not, we are not against development. We are actually pushing for the same thing. We want more people included. We want everyone included in the system. So the question should be, how can we all effectively work towards that same goal that we are pushing?
Thank you. I'm gonna pass to Arun to go touch the MOSIP stuff.
Yeah, thank you. It's a long conversation. Technical design and technical adoptions span several different perspectives. Let me attempt to answer the questions that are here. Privacy, at a fundamental level, privacy and security are not negotiable, right? But then there are some important perspectives to this. More security, very stringent measures sometimes end up excluding people. Yep. You should always view privacy and security from the lens of inclusion. For example, if you make documentary requirements so high, or if you build security in such a way that There are fixed number of centers where people have to visit. They more often than not end up excluding people, right? And a very technocratic view of digital only view of privacy, like everything happens through mobile phone. You have to remember passwords and two-factor authentications. That also ends up hindering inclusion and access, right? You have to find a balance between available technology and the available policy tools to enforce service delivery, right? QR codes are great generic technologies. We are actually working on improving the QR code technology and adding to the standards. Bring in biometric authentication element within QR code itself, eliminating the need for uh, smartphones, for example. Right. So it's a complex topic. While there are cutting edge security measures are available, we should always look at it from the lens of how does this affect last mile delivery? How does this impact program objectives? For example, blockchain is a fantastic tool, right? But then how does it scale to a population of 100 million people is something we have to always keep in mind. What's the cost to benefit ratio of adopting a certain cutting edge technology is something that we always have to keep in mind while making these decisions. Just to give you a simple example, right? Mosaic could be written on Python or it could be written in Java. We chose Java because there are simply more Java developers out there in the world who can work with these systems in developing world context. Data encryption is a good question. We are happy to send over. Most of it is open source, well documented, like thousands of pages of documents around this. But then encryption is very, very fundamental. Uh, just to give you a very layman's perspective on this, a system administrator should not be able to just look up somebody's details, right? They should be able to administer the system without having knowledge of who are in the system and what are their details. This is very, very fundamental. What does that mean? You have to capture the data and encrypt it then and there and persist that encryption. uh, Decryption while service delivery shouldn't even happen on the hard drive. It should happen in the temporary memory, which we call as RAM, right? These are all some very simple examples of how data encryption is handled in a MOSIP-like system. Data should never be sitting in a database. It should always be accessed through APIs, and the access to APIs should be within a secure encrypted protocol itself. It's a vast subject, technically well understood, but then how do you translate that to implementation of this system is where the real details lie. Although the question disappeared, but I wanted to address one anyway. How does one move away from MOSIP system, right? It's a very important question. One of the fundamental reasons why MOSIP exists today is to prevent large-scale vendor lock-ins through proprietary solutions. We typically want identity system to last a few decades. That means that you have to have control over the data, the solution itself, how you iteratively improve uh, your identity system to new and emerging requirements. That means that you should be able to fundamentally change or even step away from that system. What helps? Standards help. Your data should be in standardized, non proprietary format and should be in your control. What that enables you to throw away the technical system and bring in a new system which enables you to reuse the same data without really calling hundreds of millions of people to submit their data again, right? No country adopts MOSIP in its entirety. M in MOSIP is modular. The system design is super important. Modularity, interoperability, extensibility. These are all core software design principles that not just MOSIP, any system should adopt, even proprietary system for that matter, enabling the governments the control and the level of autonomy to make decisions, use certain parts, replace certain parts, completely throw away the system, but still have the data and the intelligence that you gathered over decades of operating your system and migrate them to a newer system which may meet your newer requirements, right? These are all fundamental software design principles. Yeah, that question bumped up on the top. Yeah, thanks.
All right, we're gonna move to wrap momentarily. I'm gonna pass this question to Elizabeth and Christina about the safeguards work, and then Bhaskar, I saw you come in. I'm gonna give Bhaskar closing remarks as we move on. I know UNICEF has been doing a lot of work around safeguards, and then we will allow everyone to transition to lunch. So Elizabeth and Christina.
Yeah, so as Christina mentioned earlier on, we are really working this year to try and make the DPI safeguards framework more actionable for all of the responsible authorities named therein. So whether you are from the government, a regulator, a technology provider, including standards bodies, vendors, um, anybody, whether you're a donor or whatnot, we would love to hear from you, either live if we have time or via the feedback mechanism that we had up on screen earlier. We would love to hear from you what would make these safeguards more actionable in your context and in your country. So if anybody does want to raise their hand now, I think we can probably take a few in the room. Um, Anybody out there want to contribute? I have a microphone for you. No, maybe not today. Is it possible to put the QR code back up on screen so people can download the document and have a read and give us the feedback? Here it is again. We would love for you to have a look at this and then let us know how we can continue to improve this over the coming year. Anything to add?
I think you did a good job. Thank you. Yeah.
All right,
Thanks, everyone.
thank you both. All right. Bhaskar, please join us and close us out. Yeah, please. Yeah. Oh, this one's working?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's okay.
I'm so sorry. I was moderating another session and it got a bit delayed. So I'm going to talk about safeguard implementation in Nigeria. And the idea is to bridge the digital divide to promote birth registration. So let me set you the context. Imagine a mother in rural Nigeria who has just given birth to a baby. And for her child to be legally recognized, she needs a national ID. A documents she may lack due to barriers such as distance, cost, or lack of awareness. The situation is far too common. Many countries, including Nigeria, now requires parents' national ID to register newborns. However, with a significant proportion lacking IDs, particularly in rural and marginalized settings, this policy risks leaving millions of children unregistered. Countries like Nigeria have also started issuing unique ID numbers during birth registration, which is a recommended practice. However, to validate these UINs, parents need to provide IDs. When parents lack IDs, this creates another bottleneck. To address this gap, we are working to integrate ID enrollment into prenatal care, ensuring that no child begins life invisible to the system. As Nigeria reaches a pivotal moment in its journey towards digital transformation, the DPI safeguards aim to implement this life cycle approach to legal identity from birth to death as its first in country partnership with UNICEF Nigeria. So, what do we want to do? Start early. Use pregnancy registration as an opportunity to verify whether expectant mothers have IDs. If they do not, connect them with national ID authorities during prenatal visits. This gives parents 3 to 5 months to address ID gaps before delivery. By linking ID enrollment to healthcare, the process naturally integrates into childbirth preparations rather than serving as a bureaucratic hurdle. Additionally, it ensures that newborns receive unique ID numbers at birth linked to their parents' ID, embedding them into Nigeria's digital identity system from day one. We are at the stage of piloting this approach in selected clinics and communities in Nigeria. And success, of course, will depend on collaboration with health workers, ID agencies, partners, CSOs, and local leaders. Insights from the pilot will inform a nationwide rollout. The government seems to be fully committed because this fits in very well within their overall ambit of one spot approach to identity. The bigger picture is Nigeria's digital transformation is picking up speed, but inclusion cannot be an afterthought. By incorporating safeguards into its ID ecosystem, the country ensures that every child and every parent is counted. This isn't just a policy shift, it's a lifeline for millions, demonstrating that technology can bridge divides when combined with empathy and smart designs. Ultimately, it is simple. No mother should have to choose between parental care and her child's future. With this approach, Nigeria is ensuring that she won't have to. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pascal. All right, and with that, we come to the end of our program. See, the ring is here. We went slow, we went fast, we covered a lot of ground. And I hope it's been valuable as to help you all in thinking about what safeguards might look like, how we might adopt them, and ultimately the kind of value that they create in our ID rollouts. So with that, I want to say thank you for staying. Thank you for your discussions and your contributions, and please enjoy lunch.